Sherlock. I now call on Senator Ward, and just to indicate to you that you have 5 minutes.
Gurmagat lasca hirlik agus boatnam dús boire cogorda gasian of Latsas of Tvetufam or lasca hirlik and Seanad. I won't require the full 5 minutes. I just wanted to make a brief contribution in respect to this bill, because I think it is a very important piece of legislation, and as we've heard from speakers already, it has been quite a long time in the birthing process, and it's been a long time in the process of coming before this House. In that regard, I think it's unfortunate to describe it as unnecessary or a waste of time or ill-timed. The reality is that we don't always get to choose the timing of the legislation that comes before this House, but it is nonetheless an important piece of legislation. And I don't think it's reasonable to take it in the context of comparing it to the importance of another legislative measure or another policy measure that might come before the House, because we can always draw up a list of the hierarchy of what we consider to be most important. But the reality is this is legislation that is a long time coming, and perhaps most importantly, it creates a regulatory regime or enhances a regulatory regime. And I agree with what Senator Sherlock said about the importance of transparency in this area, because the financial services aspect of the Irish economy is tremendously important. And of course, there are some people who are critical of that. And Senator Sherlock is quite right in identifying the mobility of the funds that might be part of the industry here. And that is a significant risk in terms of the economic model that Ireland has followed. Yet it is a model that has now for over a generation served our economy extremely well. And reference has been made by the Minister and Senators to the extent to which the financial services industry contributes to our economy. Not just in terms of jobs. I mean, there are an estimated over 30,000 people employed directly or indirectly by this sector alone. That, of course, doesn't count all the other people who are involved in terms of the provision of services and all the rest for people who come here. A reference was made to a desire by the government to increase the number of people within the economy working in financial services. I wouldn't necessarily accept that, because one of the things that international financial services does is it draws people into the country, and it brings people here who then pay tax here, who spend money here, who live here, who contribute to our society, and that's an important aspect as well, quite apart from the nearly €1 billion in direct receipts that the Exchequer receives, and the additional extra money that is spent in the sphere through all kinds of other things associated with it. But I think it's tremendously important to note that this is legislation that is bringing a positive contribution. It is adding to our reputational status within Europe. It is adding to the transparency that was mentioned by other senators. It is, of course, addressing our obligations under AML, under the EU anti-money laundering frameworks, and that is a tremendously important thing. It may not be important as other specific difficulties that we have legislatively and societally, but it is nonetheless a really important piece of legislation, and I'm delighted that we have taken it and we will bring it through second stage. I also want to acknowledge something that Senator Casey said, that this is my first time speaking in this Seanad as an elected Seanador, even though I was elected at the beginning of April, so it's bizarre that we have waited this long to come here. But I also think it's important to note that this is the first piece of legislation that we have dealt with otherwise than on an all stages in one day basis, and that I think is another positive move towards the way this chamber should be operating, and it's welcome that we're taking second stage and we're taking our time to consider the aspects and in due course to deal with the committee stage and other amendments to it. But